Well, to talk more about the growing frustration over economic injustice, Jesse LaGreca, an activist and writer at Daily Kos, joins us from our New York studio. Welcome to the show, Jesse. So I know you, like many Americans today, are unhappy with the economic model. Is it something against rich people? Do you have something against them?
No, I don't have anything against rich people at all. My problem is the kind of people who use their vast wealth to distort the system to benefit only themselves. And just last year in America, 93% of all the wealth that was created went only to the 1%. While the rest of us are being sold austerity, sold shared sacrifice, the other guys get to live on heaven and earth while they promise us a pie in the sky that'll happen one day when we die. Well, I kind of wanted that little bit of freedom here while I'm still alive.
So it sounds like people might not necessarily be angry at the rich, but angry at how some people got rich.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, take the Bank of America CEO, Brian Moynihan. This guy got a 7-time raise. His compensation was raised something like 600%. At the same time, while Bank of America was being investigated for fraud, they paid a massive settlement to the American government for foreclosure fraud. These guys were committing fraud. And here's the best part. Their stock value went down 50%. Now, if I worked as a cashier register and my register came up short 50%, I would lose my job. At Bank of America, the CEO gets a 600% bonus. And the average person doesn't understand that. It just makes them really angry, and they deserve to be angry.
So now there seems to be this sentiment that those that are responsible for the financial meltdown are not being held accountable, and that probably has to go hand in hand with the fact that this survey, 2/3 of Americans are now unhappy with the current economic model. But it's a model that's been around for a long time. So why are people so unhappy with it now?
Well, I think we got sold this idea back about 30 years ago that government was the big problem. And the corollary answer to that is that only big business can set us free. And this trickle-down mentality has basically said, just let the corporations write their own rules. Just let the banks police themselves, and all the prosperity will come to everybody. 30 years later, none of that's worked. It's been a total disaster, and the standard of living for the average person is either stagnant or decreasing, while for the wealthiest 1%, it's been better than ever. So it's a matter of just believing what your eyes tell you. If my life stays stagnant or gets worse, while the rich are just enjoying record amounts of caviar-covered tax cuts for the rich, don't be surprised when the average person's pretty angry, you know?
Another thing about this survey in the Financial Times, people are saying that fairness is what the system is lacking these days. People say wealth and income is not distributed fairly. So doesn't this go against the American ideal that hard work is rewarded?
Well, that's the thing. Hard work should be rewarded. But take a look at wages in America. They've been utterly stagnant since the 1980s, except for the wealthiest 1%. In the years between 2000 and 2006, the average America saw their annual income decrease, while for the wealthiest 1%, it went straight through the roof. You know, we have a system in America where we coddle the rich because the rich are the ones that make all the campaign donations to political campaigns. So what do you end up with? Today, the American Congress, the Senate, allowed tax subsidies for profitable oil companies to be renewed. At the same time, the Republicans in the House were passing a budget that shifts the entire burden for the collapse on the shoulders of the working class while giving record tax cuts to the rich yet again. If our politicians are going to keep punishing working class people and pandering to the rich, they should not be surprised when the public has lost utter faith in their ability to govern.
Now, clearly, Jesse, people are angry at the system. But an interesting thing I found, the Census Bureau report came out recently that shows income inequality is the biggest problem in states that typically lean Republican. And that's the party that talks the least about income inequality. Isn't that ironic?
Oh, no, it's done entirely on purpose. I mean, when you pass a tax code that over proportionally gives extra benefits to the rich and shifts the burden onto the regular working class people, you're not going to point those things out. This is why these guys are focused on straw men like socialism and Obama's birth certificate, because they're so beholden to the interests that are benefiting from our stilted, unequal system. They would rather never mention it at all. Let's not mention that obvious problem that everybody's dealing with. You know what the real problem is? Sal Alinsky. And that's what that sells to their base, because their base is unglued glued and just divorced from reality. For the average working class person who knows that the rich have it better than ever, while we're being sold austerity and suffering, it's a total farce, and reality is going to check these guys real quick.
So you think that they are they're not aware of what the situation is really like?
Well, it's also just a regional issue. You know, where I grew up, upstate New York, is not too unlike some of these states with Republican governors in the fact that your neighborhood stays the same from year to year. So you don't see how great the wealthy have it because you just don't participate in their lives. This also hurts the wealthy, too, because they don't realize how bad our suffering is. They think we sound like we're just complaining. They don't realize, no, watching my family members die because they can't get access to health care really makes me angry. So I think it's a generational issue, but it's also just a disconnect with reality. The wealthiest 1% don't deal with peasants like me. And that's why they just don't understand how our lives work. And that's also why they're the least capable of governing in the benefit interests of the average working class person. They're literally too busy fleecing us and lying to us to care about what the difference is. And it makes no surprise to me that in the southern states and the states that are dominated by Republican politicians, they have literally gotten nothing but misery for voting Republican for 30 years straight, because that was what was on the agenda.
All right, Jesse. Nice to have you on the show. That was Jesse LaGreca, activist and writer at the Daily Kos.
Pleasure as always.